As someone who's been listening to electronic music and music in general ever since I was born, I of course hold this particular genre of music close to me, in terms of enjoyment and the nostalgia factor. My earliest electronic album was The Prodigy's Fat of the Land, and from then on I found other electronic artists like Moby and Deadmau5, etc. It wasn't until 2 years ago that I discovered Aphex Twin, the father of intelligent dance music, and record label Warp's most recognised artist. The first thing that I had listened to was Come to Daddy off of the EP, released in 1997. And from then on I discovered his first album, Selected Ambient Works 85-92. I was taken aback that something this amazing could have been produced in the years 1985 to 1992, especially at a time where electronic music was still finding its early footing. I immediately fell in love with this album and listened to it constantly. Anyway, you came here for a review and not my life story, so here it is. My review of Selected Ambient Works 85-92 by Aphex Twin. The first song on the album is arguably the most memorable one. Xtal is a heavenly and ethereal track that combines a female vocal sample, another sample of a drum beat, a deep thumping kick, and a bass line that rumbles and bells across the track, and the most prominent of elements, and one that reappears throughout the majority of the rest of the record, soft, delicate synth pads that add a nice finishing gloss to this amazing track. The use of these layers and samples make the track sound so much more varied and layered than any other releases at the time. The track's echoing, tear-jerking pads and infectious catchy grooves continues for about another 4 minutes, till at the end all there is the hi-hats and the pads. A beautiful and astounding opening to the album. Probably my favourite track on this record. And following Xtal, Tha is next. It's yet another combination of house kicks and ambient synthesizers like Xtal was, but a lot more subdued and relaxed and laid back. Tha opens with this strange sounding percussion and another kick coated in reverb. As the track slowly takes shape and we hear more dabbles of strange ambient noises, a catchy bass line fades in. This bass's cutoff frequency is fiddled around with throughout the whole length of the track, emphasizing its evolving aesthetic. A minute into Tha, we hear what seems to be a field recording of people conversing in a train station if the opening voices are to be believed. The song is 9 minutes in length, which is not only the longest song on the entire record, but is also, for me, to be completely honest, the most tiresome track on the album, because all it is to me is a bass line, a kick, some weird percussion, and some ambient noise and field recordings. Though when I completely zoned out, it does make for a good listen. So despite the atmosphere of the track, which I absolutely adore, I'd say this is possibly my least favourite track on the album. After Tha, Puslewidth is also next. Puslewidth is much of the same as Xtal. It opens with this reverberated synth line that sounds very beautiful, which is then followed by more sci-fi sounding blips and bleeps. It also seems here that the delay is played with a bit too. As the track progresses, another hip-hop sounding percussion fades in, and it is once again very, very catchy. The bass that fades in is also really damn catchy. You know, I think I'm starting to see a reoccurring theme here. Anyway, another noteworthy sound that comes to mind is the synths in the minute into the track that sound like something you'd hear in an 80s sci-fi movie. This track is yet again one of my favourites on this album. It's lush, dense, spaced out, and just absolutely beautiful. I love it. Aegispolis is what happens when you take Puslewidth and exaggerate the hip-hop percussion. Believe me, the plucky synths may be cute and may sound amazing, like a lot of the lead synthesizers on this record in fact, but Aphex's use of 18th and 16th note hi-hat rattles at 2 minutes and 40 seconds always sends a tingle down my spine. It's like trap before trap was even conceived. It's so refreshing to hear a straight-up hip-hop song with sprinkles of ambient sounds and pads in here and there. Special mention goes to the splashing of open waves at 2 minutes in the track. If you don't believe me as to why I say that it's very hip-hop, then why did South African rap group Die Antwoord sample it in their track Ugly Boy? And why would it make a great rap instrumental what with it being 100 BPM? In summary, this track is groovy and ethereal as heck. I really, really love this one. At this point you may be asking me, Cammy, the album has the word ambient in the title. This isn't ambient. At best this is ambient techno. Richard lied to us. Well, first off, put down your pitchforks, because track 5, I, is a straightforward ambient track with droning, soothing pads covered in yet more reverb, delivering the listen with the most laid-back track of the entire album. It sounds so beautiful and angelic, but it's a shame that it only lasts for 1 minute tops. This style of ambient wouldn't be revisited or expanded upon until 2 years later with Volume 2 of Selected Ambient Works. a nice breather between one of the more abrasive tracks of the album, that one being Green Calyx. To startle a listener who just gotten used to I's tear-jerking ambience and thought that the album would be easy sailing from there on, Green Calyx opens with a collage of strange mechanical squeals and screeches over what sounds like a car engine revving with a flanger effect. This gives way to one of the record's most sinister tracks with rapid-fire snares, a benevolent bass, and petrified high-pitched soft synths. Kinda like a robot from an old sci-fi movie. Later in the track, samples of Robocop are played, but are manipulated to make it sound like you're walking beneath this massive robot stamping its big mechanical feet and making weird screaming noises. It's actually rather terrifying, to be quite honest. If I were to describe this track in one word, I think it would be industrial, and I think the word and description wouldn't really be too far-fetched. The following track, Heliopshan, is what I'd like to call the dance floor filler track. I name it this way as it is not only the fastest track on the entire record, but it is also the most adrenaline pumping. Heliopshan opens with more of the rattling hi-hats as a joyous, intense pad fades in. I think this sets the tone for the track very, very well. An instrument which sounds like a sitar or a guitar fades in as well. Another sample of the Apache drum beat reappears, and let me say, the moment this appears in the track is probably one of my favourite moments of this record, alongside the entirety of Xtal. It's so eventful and striking, it gives me orgasms. Sometimes the percussion stops completely and all you're left with is the pads, which is also another memorable moment of the track. In conclusion, this is another really amazing song. As for We Are the Music Makers, I don't really have anything noteworthy to say about this track other than its use of a sample from the Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Apart from that, it's more of the same as expected from this album. Catchy bass lines, hip-hop-esque percussion, the usual at this point. It is a good track though, and I do like the atmosphere that it brings. Schottky 7th Path, on the other hand, is a lot more atmospheric and tense, with spooky synths, an ominous squeal during the first minute mark, pounding, powerful percussion, and a prominent melody that is yet again infectious to say the least. If you haven't guessed by now, a lot of the tracks have this predominant sci-fi theme about them, with all the sounds Aphex incorporates into a lot of the tracks. It really does make for a good listen. The 10th track, Ptolemy, is a return to a more laid-back and funky sort of sound. More varied yet catchy percussion with cowbell added for good measure, because cowbell, as we know, automatically makes the song infinitely more catchier and better, because it's a freaking cowbell. A prominent bassline that also has its cutoff frequency tweaked with during the end of the track, much like that. Thin, breathy choruses of synths appearing later in the track that quite honestly sound like choir vocals. It sounds so joyous, which is a nice refreshing break from all the cinematic drama that was Schottky. Another one of my favourite tracks, and one that can be described as an assembly line personified as music. Pretty accurate, I'd say. Ed Fellingham is next as the 11th track. I've seen a WeAreTheMusicMakers.com post about this song, and one user described it as a foggy tundra with distant electronic bleeps in the distance and very faint lights. You're trying to get closer, but you cannot find it. After listening to this track numerous times, this description of the track is not far-fetched. It does have this very ominous sort of sound to it, what with the long droning pads taking centre stage. The thumping kick also adds this threatening atmosphere as well. I'd say the track wouldn't seem out of place on the soundtrack of Dead Space. Really good one, always creeps me the heck out though. For Delphium, it kinda honestly sounds the same as Ptolemy, to be quite honest, although that doesn't mean it's a bad track per se. It's just as catchy, in fact. I especially like the bass of this one. Very dense and just lovely sounding. I almost find myself nodding my head to the beat of this track. The final 13th track on Saw 85-92 is Actium. This one is also one of my favourites. Its prominent atmospheric 4 on the floor kick is very catchy, not to mention the underwater sounding bassline, which is also really infectious, like a lot of the bass lines on this entire album actually. As for the actual percussion, it also sounds quite funky. The weird laser effects in the background are also a nice touch, and the crackles and audio glitches during the song are very nice and are very tingly to my ears. In conclusion, Aphex Twin's selected ambient works 85-92 is quite possibly one of the greatest, if not the greatest, electronic albums I have ever heard. Richard D. James's use of technology, effects, drum machines, and synthesizers to create this massive behemoth of a record is astounding, and considering his age, would make him a prodigal genius of electronic music. Very revolutionary for its time indeed. This album puts it on a pedestal, usually reserved for composers and producers such as Brian Eno and Jean-Michel Jarre, and many other innovators of electronic music. If you have at least a mild interest in electronic, please pick this album up. You will not regret purchasing it. I can guarantee you it.